Hey there, welcome to Fat Product Review. My name is Crystal. Welcome Tigress Osborn, who is the recently, what's the word called? But she's recently become the NAAFA board chair. So we're excited to talk with her about NAAFA. And maybe we'll touch a little bit on the history of NAAFA. And then also I want to just say that Tigress is a fantastic and fabulous fat activist, fat liberationist, intersectional feminist, social justice, amazing font of information, just all around fabulous. And I'm so excited and honored to have you here today because I love everything that you touch, Tigress. So welcome.
Thank you for that. I don't think of myself as like the fat activist Jill of all trades, but I'll take it. Font of
Well,
information, all that stuff, I'll take it.
yeah, for sure. I mean, to me, you do it all. So tell us a little about NAAFA, and I want to make sure I get this right. National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance.org or dot nothing.
Yes. Yes, NAAFA, National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. At one point in NAAFA's early days, it was the National Association to Aid Fat Americans. But for most of the 51-year history, it's been or for a large chunk of the history, it's been to advance fat acceptance.
And would you say that NAAFA is or has been or is for sure going to be also very intersectional in that we're talking about equity and things like that have to do with racial inequities? And because we all know that, yeah, it's hard being a fat person, but like I would never say it's easy to be a fat Black woman or fat Black person. I know there's a lot of myths around that, but I think there's a lot of education still to do around that. And I'm hoping that NAAFA is going to be, maybe they've always have been, but very intersectional.
NAAFA has not always been very intersectional. And in fact, so the founder of NAAFA, Bill Fabry, is a cisgender white man who started NAAFA because he was watching the way that the world treated his fat wife and he didn't like it. And he teamed up with Lou Auerbach, who had written a piece about, basically, we weren't using the word fat phobia at the time, but had written a piece about discrimination against fat people in, I believe, the New York Times. And they sort of teamed up and started this organization. And it was Bill's friends and their fat wives, right? So it was like straight people, mostly thin cisgender men and fat cisgender white women. That's who it mostly was in the beginning. And NAAFA started in 1969, and if you know anything about U.S. history, you know what kind of year that 1969 was in terms of everything from really important civil rights, the Alcatraz occupation by Native Americans, the Stonewall Rebellion, kind of kicking off what we think of as the modern LGBTQIA rights movement. Like, there's all this stuff in 1969, right? It's like Sesame Street started. There's like culturally and socially and politically, there's all this stuff in 1969. And so it feels like really important that NAAFA was birthed at that same time. But the fact that it was happening at the same time as all these social movements did not make NAAFA super committed to partnership with all these other movements, right? And I had a chance to. We have a webinar series where we host interesting fat folks and folks. Yeah. Thank you. You can find our past webinars on YouTube. We're gearing up to start doing our 2021 webinars in February, and I had the opportunity to interview Bill Fabry, who is still with us and who's still very, very active in body positivity and fat rights and fat liberation movement, and who is the chair of the Council for Weight and Size Discrimination, and who has spent many years on the board of ASDA, which is the Association for Size Diversity and Health. And so Bill has stayed in it, right? Even when he hasn't been officially part of the governing of NAAFA, he's stayed in it as an active member, and he's stayed in it in service through all these other organizations and stuff. And Bill will tell you that NAAFA was not intersectional, and that in fact he was part of the reason NAAFA was not intersectional. The board was relatively conservative, or depending on who you ask, pretty conservative
Mm-hmm.
for, for radical liberation activists, right?
Sure, sure.
It's radical. The idea of NAAFA is radical in and of itself, right? The
Yeah,
use of the word fat
right.
in a positive or even neutral way is radical in and of itself. So it's hard to describe anyone who does that as conservative. But
Sure.
the board had the board has a long history of approaching NAAFA as though, like, yes, of course that other stuff is important, but we're the fat group, so we focus on fat stuff. And then there is also, I mean, you referenced this. There's this pervasive idea, I think in general culture, and I think in fat activism, that somehow fat people of color have it easier because there's a cultural, because there's something about our cultures that are more accepting of fatness. And that there's varying degrees of truth to the idea that different POC cultures treat fatness differently than mainstream white culture, right? There's various degrees of truth to that. But also, even if, like, I'll use myself as an example. So I'm a mixed race Black woman. Even if Black community were the most accepting, anti-fat phobia, fully embracing of all bodies community of all time, I would still also live in the rest of the world, which is not that, and which is also racist, right? So the
Yeah,
idea that, like, fat people of color have it easier because there's
yeah.
cultural protection is, and there are nuanced things to talk about that, but
It,
they should be talked about through the lens of the lived experience of those people, right?
right.
Like, not white activists just being like, seems like you guys are okay, so we're gonna just concentrate on this fat stuff without
Yeah.
thinking about how it intersects with race, right?
I guess and I feel like too, and because I have definitely had this thought that, let's say, queer fat people have a little bit of cultural protection too. And so what I would love to see NAAFA do is, like, let's make sure we are supporting trans fat people, Black fat people, queer fat people, all fat people, and make sure that we're kind of killing some of that old crap myth, even some of the crap that I believed about Black women and queer people having this cultural protection. Like, I hope that's a part of the NAAFA goals going forward, because I think it's really important. And of course, I understand the base is just fat people, but we need to make sure we include all fat people.
I mean, and I think that, in some ways there was a well-meaning, from leadership at least, there was a well-meaning sort of like, we'll let other people do the things that they specialize in, and what we specialize in is fat, right? But there still wasn't enough active partnership, and there were, there were times in NAAFA's history where there were what they called caucuses, or
Mm-hmm.
sort of small groups or committees that focused on particular. There was a feminist caucus, there was a super size caucus, but, like, there's not, so there, it's not like NAAFA's always been completely unaware of the idea that there were other social issues. They just haven't always been integrated into NAAFA, in a social way, in a political way, in a cultural way. So for folks who are watching the show that don't know a lot about NAAFA,
Yeah.
NAAFA for so many years, I mean, you have to think about, NAAFA starts in 1969, right? So we have the decade of the 70s, the decade of the 80s, the decade of the 90s. Those are all things that precede how we think of body positivity now,
Yeah.
right? And as limited as visibility is for fat people now in mainstream media, that as limited as that is now, it was even more limited in those earlier years of NAAFA. And there weren't all of these plus size fashion shows and, plus fat swim parties. And a lot of those things started with NAAFA. Like the first on record official fat people swim party, like, that's NAAFA, right?
Yep.
the first
Mm-hmm.
the first fat fashion show, like, that's NAAFA. There obviously were people doing some of these things in their own communities, but, like, in terms of, like, sort of recorded history of the movement, right? And I
Sure.
think it's important for us to recognize always that there were individuals or small collectives of people who were doing things that are not part of sort of what we see as the whole like historical structure of fat activism, or later fat studies in academia, or like fat fashion, all of those things. There were always people doing some of those things, but NAAFA has this history as being like one of the only gathering places for so many of those years. The local chapters, NAAFA no longer has local chapters in various cities, for a variety of reasons. They sort of faded out or transitioned into other things. And so we now mostly operate as, the board, and then an advisory board who are experts in their field, who help us with things, and and crews of volunteers doing things, but sort of like mostly an online presence, and mostly trying to keep a national perspective. We can be a little too East Coast and a little too West Coast just because of where our board members have been located for a long time. And where some of our most active members have been. But we're trying to be more both cross-national and global in terms of thinking about, fat rights stuff. But so this is like a super long answer to the question of like, is NAAFA going to be intersectional? And what does NAAFA see as people's, different demographic groups' needs, and how that all kind of fits together? The answer is we're figuring that stuff out. We have a strong commitment. So I just became board chair on January 1st.
Congratulations.
Thank you. This makes me the second ever Black board chair of NAAFA. Phyllis Warr, who was the interim board chair for a few months in 2014, 2015, was the first Black chair. And NAAFA does not have a long history of people of color on the board. There have been a handful of people of color on the board over the years. We brought on new board. I've been on the board for 5 years. And I came onto the board at a time of great instability. There had been a board chair for a long time who did a lot of really great things to professionalize the organization, but who was also controversial in some ways. And when he died suddenly, Phyllis stepped in to take over for him in a temporary way. But so there was still a lot of transition at the time that I came onto the board. And then both that board chair and then a few months later, the treasurer, for personal reasons, had to leave the board. And so there were three of us. There were three of us, and we worked, trying to get people to join us, but we couldn't get anybody to join the board for a while. And so we decided to focus on the 50th anniversary conference that was coming up. And I tell people this, and I'll just be really candid in saying this. Like, for me, that conference was very much like, this is either NAAFA's swan song. This is either how we go out gracefully, or this is our Phoenix Rising story, where we, like NAAFA has, is not in the glory days of when it was the only game in town in terms of size acceptance. Fat people dating each other and finding each other, or people of all sizes who like to date and find fat people to date. It was the national gathering of fat activists that was the biggest, for people who were super advanced activists, like the people who were picketing the White House about fat rights, all the way down to people who, like, NAAFA, their first NAAFA conference was the first time they ever heard of fat rights or fat liberation, right? So, but there were many, many years in NAAFA's history where NAAFA was sort of the only game in town, especially in most parts of the country. And that's not true anymore. And so I think the organization did not do the best job of sort of riding the wave of change around how fat is talked about in mainstream culture, and how activists want to be engaged. And so, we were kind of still historically significant, but not as significant in a contemporary way. And so it was like, this conference is it, right? This conference is where we bring back together some of the veterans, and bring in some of the new folks and see how that energy works, right? And we're going to do things like, we are going to be, intersectionality has been a huge part of my push as a board member. I was a little bit like the anti-NAAFA person, like the sort of like, all right, this is what NAAFA's historically been, but we're trying to change that. but I know y'all still see it as what it was, and we're trying to make it something different. And how do you do that? But don't associate me with the what it was. Only associate me with the where it's going, right? I was like a little bit like that. As the chair, you just kind of gotta claim it all. Like it's all my legacy that I have to be responsible for. And so I have to be responsible for helping change the places where it was not an inclusive community, right?
What does NAAFA consider its charter to be?
Well, we have a vision and mission statement. Those are on our website. Like you said, it's NAAFA.org, NAAFA.org.
Right.
And to synopsize them, it is to raise awareness of the rights, dignity, and needs of fat people. So basically to support fat people through advocacy and education in getting, I really should have the mission memorized word for word, but I'm paraphrasing it. But it's Girl Scout. Like, we're gonna use education, advocacy, and activism to help other people understand fat people better and to support fat people in doing whatever the hell they want to do.
Wonderful.
Basically.
We deserve all of that, right? Always say we all deserve dignity and respect no matter who we are, and that includes fat people.
Well, and we do. So NAAFA has been seen, especially at various points. Again, when you have a 51-year history, you're looking at like a lot of different NAAFAs actually, right? But the thing that a lot of different NAAFAs had in common over at least 40 of those years is like, this is a fat space. It's not necessarily a fat everything space. So you can leave your other stuff at the door and come in and be fat with us. Right. And we can't operate that way. Yeah. First of all, I can't be the chair of that organization because I don't operate that way, right? I lead with race a lot. I have some professional and personal background as a diversity educator and I have a degree in Black studies and like I'm blackity black, right? Like I show up as like I'm Black. Even when
nice tan, Tigress, nice tan.
Well, but people even when people actually do that, right? Like even obviously I have skin color privilege as a lighter skinned mixed race Black woman with like a lot of proximity to whiteness and all these other things. I have privilege. And what a lot of people expect from that is, so you won't be one of those blackity Black people. You'll be one of those people that makes it easier on us. Oh, yeah. And I'm not that.
Make it comfortable for the white people in the room.
I know how to employ that skill. But it's not, I don't lean into that. I don't think that people grow through comfort, right? Yeah. And so like I couldn't be the chair if we weren't working on making the organization more inclusive, more intersectional, and not just in the superficial sort of social ways, right? But that people know NAAFA, many people know NAAFA as a social group. Right? It's a place where I met other fat people, where I got to vibe with other fat people, where I got to swim and do fashion shows and all of those things. And not everyone knows NAAFA's more political history, the role NAAFA had in supporting people in the few places where it is illegal to discriminate against fat people, the role NAAFA didn't lead that movement in any of those places, but the role NAAFA and NAAFA members and NAAFA board members had in supporting those movements. The ways that NAAFA's visibility, especially, in the 70s and 80s when there weren't a lot of other visible fat people in media. Like I tell people all the time, like if you saw fat people on Donahue talking about how it was okay to be fat, those were probably NAAFA people, or they were people from the fat underground. Right, they were probably one or the other of those two things, right?
Does NAAFA have a lobbyist? I know NAAFA is a mostly volunteer organization, so that
NAAFA is an all-volunteer organization.
Oh, so yeah, lobbyists are expensive.
Lobbyists are expensive. NAAFA is an all-volunteer organization, and that's important for people to know because I think that a lot of people think NAAFA has way more capacity than we actually have.
Oh, right? Really?
We have a board member. We have a board of 7, all volunteers, including me. Like this is not like an executive director position where I'm the paid person and I work with the board. Like I am also a volunteer. So we're all volunteers. And I think people imagine we have some sort of like AARP kind of or NAACP kind of budget. We do not. We are much more grassroots in terms of the level of budget that we have. But like where I was going with that sort of like some people think of NAAFA as really social and don't know some of the activist history. We really do identify as an organization, as a civil rights organization.
Okay,
And
yeah.
we use the term fat rights more often because we do want to be, we want to be conscious of how much people feel like civil rights refers to rights that have to do with racial discrimination, and we want to be like conscious and aware of that history. So even though like technically we're a civil rights organization, we mostly use the word fat rights. But especially from like a sort of governmental perspective, legislative perspective, right? We're a
Legislation, yeah.
civil rights group. We do expect some of our future work to be much more directly involved in working towards the passage of more legislation to protect fat people.
That's what really interests me. I'm really excited about that. Get
So
involved in that part.
we're super transitional right now. Like I've been the board chair for 25 days or something. And even though I've been on the board for a while, as I said, a lot of that focus was trying to have a successful 50th anniversary conference. And then last year, the year, following the conference, we created a Future of NAAFA committee, some folks from the conference and a few other interested folks who will help us, think through modernizing NAAFA and making NAAFA not just intersectional and accessible, but like relevant to people, right? That people feel like that is for me. Not just that's a good thing and I'm glad it exists, but it's really not for me. Like, how can we get it?
It has that, I think, attitude. People have attitude that's kind of more old-fashioned fat activism, right? And so now we need to make sure that people feel like it's modern fat activism.
Exactly. And so, one of the things that they advised, that committee advised updating our website, which we knew needed to be done and didn't, have a lot of bandwidth for, but got it done through their assistance and support, and especially through the work of Darlene Howell, who was the chair at the time. And, and then launched a blog on the website, which has been really popular. We expanded the webinar series last year. So like things that are, and the webinar series has been probably the most intersectional thing NAAFA has ever done.
So good.
And I'm telling you, it's not intersectional enough. Like we haven't done enough about, partnership with disability justice folks. We haven't done enough about, about gender, sexual orientation things. We haven't done enough about fat people and eating disorders. Like there's all kinds of topics in fat life, in the needs of fat community that we still haven't covered, or demographics that we still haven't spotlighted, but we're working on it. And it's more than anything had probably ever been before from NAAFA.
I have faith. I have total and complete faith. Just based on how you guys came out of the gate. It's like, okay, this is where it's going to be. This is awesome.
Yeah.
It's
so we're trying to like make it like a new day of NAAFA.
It feels
but you're working against a 50-year history that for some people has really personal injuries or, really big disappointments around political choices that were made. Like there have been a couple of times in NAAFA's history when the discussion has come up about whether NAAFA should change its name because we have less access to some resources like grants and things like that because people think it's not a real organization, right? Because the national group of fatties, haha, whatever, right? And also because there are many fat people who need a place to connect, a place to learn more about fat politics, a place to, to engage in activism with other fat people, whatever those things are, aren't ready to use the word fat to talk about themselves. It's really painful for some people to use the word fat to talk about themselves because they've only experienced it through bullying and through insult and
hurling at them to try to make them feel like shit.
And also internalized stuff, right? The stuff that you take from the culture and internalize. There are lots of people who can, like, theoretically that sounds really good to say the fat people, and if other fat people are good at that, I'm proud of them and I'm cheering for them, but I still can't, right? And so again, that's one of those places where like it feels really weird to be kind of known as the most conservative fat organization, because there are people for whom just the use of fat, not anything we do, not my blackety black self as the chair, not we did this thing where we had this transgender person, not any of that stuff. That's not the controversial stuff. It's just that we have the word fat in our name
Yep.
and refer to ourselves as fat. That in and of itself is too much for some people. So, you know, part of our charge then is how do we reach the fat people who don't want to be known as the fat people?
And to take that to another step, that's like has to do with social media and stuff. If you ever want to buy ads or try to get events filled and has the word fat in it, Facebook's going to turn you down, or Instagram's going to turn you down because of the word fat. They feel like, oh, you must be using that word to bully somebody else, so you can't possibly use that word in an ad. And it's just like it's everywhere, you know. Facebook doesn't like fatties.
Right. Well, and you know from this show, right? If I search the wrong combination of fat product review, I get all kinds of stuff I never want to see in my life, you know?
Yes.
And it's because like that's how fat is used often, right?
Yeah.
So even getting people to be like, for me, the first time I heard of NAAFA, I was like, what? You can call yourself fat? And then
Yeah.
nobody can say that to you as an insult? That was
Right.
really my reaction the first time I ever heard of NAAFA when I was a college student. There was a NAAFA representative who did a workshop on my campus. And I was at Smith College, and, you know, women's colleges do stuff like that. A little ahead of the curve. College students always ahead of the curve in terms of social justice stuff. But I think there's something particular about women's college campuses that made a lot more attention on like, you know, body politics stuff, right?
Yeah, of course,
And so we had this person from NAAFA who, Carrie Hemingway from the Boston chapter of NAAFA, who came and presented at my college. And it was the first time I probably had seen people on Donahue, like I said, you know, Sally Jesse
right.
Raphael, Oprah, whatever. I know I'm dating myself with those references, but
Ricky Lake.
But I probably had seen people from NAAFA, but I hadn't remembered the name, you know. And so when I encountered Carrie and she was talking, you know, about what NAAFA was, just to me, the idea that there are people who call themselves fat as a like, that's right.
Yeah, that's like
MFers, you know, and so I loved that, right? But everybody doesn't have that reaction.
yeah.
Some people have the reaction of like, well, why can't they call it the National Plus Size Association? You know, and it's not going to be that. I mean, maybe, you know, it's come up a few times in NAAFA's history, the sort of like, would we reach more people if we change that? What I can promise you is that won't change on my watch, right? There might be some future generation of NAAFA that decides they want it to stand for the National Association of Fluffy Americans or whatever. That might be a thing. It's not going to be a thing while I'm here. So like, I can't, we're still too much in the infancy of me being chair to say like, this is exactly how NAAFA is going to change under my watch. But I can tell you that about how it's not going to change. It's still going to have the word fat in it.
Since we only have a few minutes left, what would you like people to know? Let's just say like I'm a brand new fatty and I'm like new to all of this. I know there's something for me here. And then also, what if I'm a fatty like me who's been around forever? And what else does NAAFA have to offer those two audiences, do you think? And what is it that you want to accomplish this year if you can? Or both or all?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm sure about is I do want to continue to grow our webinar series, both in terms of depth and in terms of reach. And we know for sure that we will do that. We instituted a grant program. I really want new people, especially, to know about the grant program because you can apply for up to $500 in funding from NAAFA to start a project in your own area. Of course, we have some limitations around funding right now. For in-person events because of COVID, but you can still plan other kinds of things or projects that you want to work on that will benefit fat people. You know, we've funded a zine, we've funded an issue of a fat zine, we funded some work around a one-woman show, we funded some academic work. Like, so we started that just last summer. I'm super excited about it, and you can find the information on our website under grant programs. And I want people to apply for those grants. I mean, we can only give out a certain number every quarter. We've carved that out of our budget. If you would like to contribute more to that, on our website, there's a place for giving, and you can earmark stuff for the grant program, for education programs. So that's going to continue for at least a couple more quarters, and we expect that it will continue for another fiscal year after this one. So I want people to know that there's that resource available for them. We often get messages from people like, how can I volunteer? And we don't always have specific projects going that we need more volunteerism on, but we always want ideas from people.
Okay.
I have heard from people that sometimes in the past it has felt like the NAAFA board is up here and the members are over here. And we definitely don't want that dynamic. We've got, there are 7 of us on the board. I encourage you to look at the board member bios on our website too,
Yeah.
and just see the diversity of experience that the 7 of us bring to this board. So I'm super excited about the new board. So the main thing I want people who've already known NAAFA to know is I hope you will give it a chance. We're trying to make it something new. So if you have bridges that you feel like were burned and there's something we can do to repair those, reach out to me.
Mm-hmm.
If I do something that upsets you, reach out to somebody else on the board. Like, we want to keep our relationships clean. And we want to do repair for what we can repair, and we want to be honest about what we can't repair, and own it as an organization if it really was something we did, right? There's a lot of, rumor and stories and dramas, because 51 years is a lot of time. And
Yeah.
an insular community, or also an insular community where people are like dating and having sex with each other and stuff. So drama, right? Soap opera. Fat people have soap opera too.
Yes, we
Um,
do.
but if you see us
Yeah.
doing something that you think is important, or if there's something important specifically that you think we should be doing, please let us know. We do anticipate doing a national survey this year.
Cool.
To collect ideas from people in FAT community, both member and non-member. So we're going to be getting started on some of the groundwork for that soon, and I'm not sure exactly when we'll roll it out, but hopefully before summer. And I think the message for both groups of people, the new folks and the experienced folks, is like, just give it a try. In
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
in the sense of, the people who already have some past with NAAFA, give it another try. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. What the heck?
let's see what we're doing, and then
Yeah.
let us know if we're still not, if we're like, we're not going to be relevant for everybody. But I do see NAAFA as middle of the road in some ways, and more middle of the road than I personally necessarily am. We have to, I see us as like the gateway organization in a lot of ways
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
people who are new to activism. And so we are the holders of history. We need to be getting that history correct. We need to be not
Mm-hmm.
leaving people out of that history. We're the holders of history in some ways. Even though we are not tremendously resourced, we are more well resourced than some other FAT organizations.
Sure.
And because we are a federally recognized nonprofit organization, there are some people who will give to us that won't give to other organizations. So we have, we can utilize that better, and spread that around a little more, which is part of what we're working on. So so that's mainly the thing. I have a lot of hope for NAAFA. There was a
I
point
do.
where I was going to leave the board because I just thought everything was so entrenched in the way it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
that it was doing me more harm than good to be associated with this brand.
Yeah.
Right?
Not
That
good.
as an activist, it had the potential to damage my credibility as an activist to continue to be involved. And
Nothing
so
could damage your credibility, Tigress. Nothing. Unless you murder somebody or something. But yeah,
Well, I
I
mean,
hear what
thank you.
you're
And
saying.
I'm really flattered and humbled by community who have had the response of like, oh, Tigress is taking the reins. That's great. I think we were just in so much like, just grind and keep this organization alive, get it to this conference, and keep the wheels turning so we can get to that next era. I never want to downplay the labor that went into that and the love that went into that from the 3
Yeah.
of us who were on the board, right? I don't want the fact that it feels like a new day to be like feel like a condemnation of old NAAFA. There are some behaviors of old NAAFA that need to be condemned.
Mm-hmm.
That need to be called out and owned, and in some ways have been, and in other
Yeah.
ways that work still needs to be done, right? But also like just I want to balance meeting people where they're at, and then also pushing people further along the spectrum of activism. And sometimes that means pushing them into the hands of one of the other orgs that's even more radical than we are. Cool, happy to do that.
Yeah. The reason why you can't be involved in both or all 3 or 10 But I
Yep.
mean, you need to protect your energy, and I'm glad that you are protecting you're keeping your boundaries, and I think that's going to really be beneficial to NAAFA as well. So I'll share the link. I'll also
Yes,
share the specific grant link in the show notes. And
that's great.
how can people reach? Oh, first of all, can you tell us how they can find you on social media, and if they wanted to reach you via email, is there like a NAAFA Tigress NAAFA email?
If they want to reach me, it's chair@naafa.org. We just got that claimed. So
Okay.
people will be able to reach me that way. And our website is naafa.org, NAAFA.org, or people can see it on the screen. And on Instagram, we are NAAFA official. And on Twitter, we are NAAFA_official. And on Facebook, if you search NAAFA, you will find us, or if you do facebook.com/equality at every size.
I'll share all
So
those in the show notes
we
as well.
were all of this social media branding happened at different stages of NAAFA. If I had my dream, we would just be NAAFA official at every single thing.
Everywhere.
But some of them have been out there long enough that it's not worth making the change. So we just published the litany of what they all are, the list of what they all are. And we
All you
also
can
have
do.
a free monthly newsletter that people can sign up for if they're interested. And they can sign up for that at our website as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. chair@naafa.org. That's officially Tigress's email at NAAFA. One more email address to respond to, Tigress.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all of your
Yeah.
work. And I'm so grateful to everybody in NAAFA that's ever been involved with NAAFA. Well, most everybody, I think. It sounds like there might be a few nefarious characters, but I don't know about any of that stuff. And I'm just happy that NAAFA still exists. And I'm really happy that you're helping out now and getting involved. And I think it's going to be great for NAAFA and for all of us fatties out here that need that kind of support. So thank you, Tigress.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for this show. Thank you for inviting me on the show. I think you're connecting people with lots of great resources. So I'm always happy to work with you.
That's the plan. So yeah, if
And
you
we
like
look
this,
forward to hearing from all of you at our various NAAFA presences. Please follow us.
if you like this show and you like our other content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It's right down there. Thank you so much, and I'll talk with you soon. Thanks, Tigress.